Well, good day again. Last time we ended up with a question of future and past, but we still have to articulate some of the conclusions that we must draw from the modern establishment of reality and the modern subject. The subject, as I mentioned, was interpreted as a mind having ideas, specifically mathematical ideas. Okay. Now, what is peculiar about that claim is that, remember, we talked about Plato, who have discovered ideas in their own right, not in our mind, but existing in their own world. So what happened in modern understanding is they took those ideas in as ultimate reality and placed them in human mind, and in fact invented that mind as being subjective. Now, peculiar thing when you have that kind of subjectivity, which cannot access the world through perception, it means it is radically individual. Because, as I said before, I do not know in modern terms what is in the mind of the others. They do not know what is in my mind. And so we are distinct individuals, and we have no objective criterion to judge which mind is better and which is worse, which is true, which is false, whose values are better than somebody else's. In short, even values are human subjective values. And my values and the values of others might be distinct. And therefore we have what is, I mentioned, a radical individualism. Each person, as not having any objective status, being a subject without any essence, can make of herself or himself whatever they decide. Now, that means behind the instrumental reason that we can make anything out of anything is a subject who decides what we want to make of ourselves and the world. Okay? That means there is not just instrumental reason, but a modern will. It's very important to recognize that, because later on there were invented all kinds of theories that everything is will and power. In contemporary jargon, in quotes, philosophers talk about that everything is power. Every language, every discourse is power. And there are nothing but power confrontations. Isn't it amazing when we speak of democracy and we talk about the power struggle of political parties? Now, in democracy, parties should not have power. They should be serving us and not having power over us. So when you use the term power, it is very much modern invention of power as being totally subjective will. Now, what is this will? We don't know what it is in principle at the start. We shall find out later on. Now, since the future is not yet, and since we can, as subjects, calculate material conditions and predict a future and get a calculated future, it means then the will can project what it wants of the future, then use mathematical methods, apply them, and make the conditions to achieve the predicted future of the will. The will becomes here most important. Perhaps you have read way back, maybe 15, 20 years ago, there was a book called future shock. And then they made a documentary out of it, dealing with scientists. And the very serious scientists are walking around and asking the public, well, what do you want us to make? What do you want to be? In short, what do you project yourself as future beings? You want to have one blue eye, one red eye. You want to be smart, you want to be artistic. We can code the material conditions and make you into what you want to be. Okay? That imagine is like saying we can design ourselves and make ourselves into what we project ourselves to be. All we want to know from you is tell us what you want to be. That means we as scientists will establish the genetic conditions, the chemical conditions, and so on, transform your material, and you will become what you yourself want to be. This is one aspect, that is that we are technical beings and we can be made and remade technically. Now, what is at issue? We have invented the modern subject who invents progress, who invents instrumental reason, and who says that objectively speaking, we can reduce ourselves into different material domains. In short, instead of being the subject that creates everything or invents everything, we can treat ourselves objectively. And that means we can become subject matters to objective scientific constructs. Excuse me, biological, chemical, economic, everything you can imagine can become the way we define ourselves. So biology will define us genetically, chemistry will define us chemistry, microchemistry, and macrochemistry, and so on. It means that we become the sum of materially invented disciplines. Each discipline will define us objectively, and that means materially and technically. Okay? So, for example, if you talk to contemporary psychiatry, it will not talk about your feelings. It might ask you about how you feel and so on. It will simply say, well, if you feel this way, we have medication that will change your feelings. In short, even your feelings will be reduced to chemistry. Okay? So to speak, magic. You want to be in love, you get a love potion, okay? And so all of a sudden you are in love. Yeah, in short, this is known as, I call it reductionism. We reduce everything as human, the subject, into different disciplines, into different material domains. So we can be then explained what we do genetically, biologically, chemically, and so on. And we have a human being, a sum of different biological, chemical, and so on parts, which can be explained purely materially. Now, we are in a world where material explanations count. Like I mentioned, psychologically, how you feel is simply chemistry. What you think might be brain physiology, explains how we think. What we believe may be a conditioning by your social environment. What we have is a dilemma. We are, as modern subjects, after all, if we take that for granted, as self-creating, and that means autonomous, responsible. Why responsible? Because if we have no essence and we invent, for example, our methods, scientific methods, we are responsible for their invention. So what do? Instead of saying we are responsible, we are now saying, well, it is biochemistry that we have invented who is responsible for our activity. In this objective, so to speak, objectivated world, the world that we made into an object of our own disciplines, the objects that now rule us are telling us that we're not responsible. Responsibility is going away. That means we are not free either, because every discipline, no matter what you do or say, will be used to reduce you to that material domain, to biology, chemistry, or whatever, and it will explain your actions. So there is a big issue. You can say, no, what I did is because of my genetics. Philosophers of science nowadays talk about, well, what is ethics? Well, ethics can be explained genetically. Okay, we have genes which make us do what we do, and genes decide how we form societies for the protection of our genetic pool. Okay? So we use that explanation and say it is our genes which make us do what we do, which make us form societies, and therefore genetics is explanation of all our ethical relationships. Okay? Everything else is the same. A chemical explanation. For example, when we talk about thinking, that we are thinking beings, rational beings, well, the answer is thinking is in brain physiology. You don't need anything like a human mind and so on. Mind is brain physiology. So if we want to explain how we understand the world, we have to do research in our brain physiology. Okay? That's the norm. Now, bigger picture is social, political, and economic. We'll get to the future projections, okay? It's fascinating. But when we talk about the value of the world, the value of our nature, having reduced the universe to material conditions, that means nature has no value. There might be trees as a combination of biochemistry and so on, but they have no value. Value comes from the human subject. So now, this is a big issue in modern political and social and economic thought. If nature has no value, if we add value to nature, not only value but beauty, as 18th century people began to talk about, well, nature has no beauty. Beauty comes from the way we see it. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, okay? If there was no eye of the beholder, there would be no beauty of nature. So that means everything is values and so on are subjective. So now, how do things become valuable? And here we have to go a step back into that material world, which we compose by calculating and combining by our intervention. That means that when we intervene to change our environment by our mathematical calculations, we add value to that nature. In short, if I build something materially, I give that material world value. Without my doing something with it, it would not have any value. If there is a forest full of apples, the apples have no value unless I pick them, and my picking gives them value. This is known as labor theory of value. That is both a basis both of Marxism and capitalism. Human labor gives value to the valueless world. When we make something, we give it value. And here comes a next feature of that, so to speak, conclusion. If we give value to things by making them, by planting them, by collecting them, and doing whatever we do with them, then since we gave value to those things, they belong to us. I, as an individual, plant a potato, the potato grows into many little potatoes. All the little potatoes are my value, my property, because I gave value by investing my labor into the soil and into planting the potato. Aha. So everybody else can do the same thing. They can give value to nature by making something out of it and making, of course, something of themselves. Okay. So now here we have another level of understanding that we project what we want and we make what we want by changing our material environment. And by changing that environment, we give it value, and that value makes what we make our property. In short, property depends on your labor. And so you have both capitalism and Marxism saying, for example, John Locke, and then what is the whole gang of Marxists say, what gives value to nature is our human labor. Otherwise, the world has no value. And so we have a big battle between capitalism and communism. One has vanished, but appears in different disguises. That who owns what we make, what we produce? Okay, is the individual or society? If you will have any questions to that, we can discuss that. But what I'm saying is that the modern subject became materialized. He now became a person who works, produces material value, and that material production is the question of who owns it and whose property is it. Okay. Yeah, later on we'll talk about that in contemporary big debates concerning that. But now let's return back to the subject who has become materialized, biologized, chemistry, bundle of chemical things, as somebody said. We now are an ugly bag of almost water containing lots of floating chemistry particles. Okay. So now, how is it that we have future? Because future is the world. And as we sit here right now as material beings. Now, modern beings, objectively speaking, are material beings, physiological beings. We say that a way to explain the future is we project it. But now, remember, the subject is now made into some of different objective disciplines. One of those disciplines is, for example, physiology. And above all, everything has to be explained in terms of brain physiology. So now the question is, so since the brain physiology is the ruling part of human biology and so on, and chemistry, then the brain must project the future, what the will wants, okay? Now the will here is brain projection. The subject as having a will has to disappear, objectively speaking. So now the question arises, how is it that the brain projects the future that we want to construct? Well, ontologically, that is, in reality, no matter how you slice it, the brain is now. There's no way out. Like the stone is now, the brain as a thing is now. Well, the big debate is, well, the brain creates images of the future. And that's a cosmic question, the images of the future. Well, the problem is the images that the brain, so to speak, sees or experiences, they are now. They don't talk about future or past. Next question is, and the scientific answer given to is, well, how do we access then if the brain can't do it? Aha, we shall go back to scientific method and scientific theories which are mathematical. So we can measure future, if we are projecting it, mathematically. We can measure the distance from now till tomorrow. Aha, science, mathematical science comes to our aid to explain how can we measure the length of time from now till tomorrow, or from now till Andromeda will crash into our galaxy 4 billion light years away. We can measure the distance mathematically, 4 billion light years. Well, it's fantastic. I mean, no better explanation. And our friend who talked about Socrates, who would question everything, would jump for joy, said, you guys are smart. You answered the major question of our future. We can measure the length of it. Oh, question. Do mathematical numbers are in time? Do they exist in time? Does 1 or 2 exist anywhere in objective reality, so to speak, even in our so-called brain that we use to explain our projection of future? Well, the problem is our physiology is temporal. We are temporal. We change from day to day. Your brain, young brain, my old brain, are very different and change from moment to moment. But yet when we claim that we can measure time, its length, and you measure mathematically, we're using mathematics which are not in time. You know, when I was a kid, I didn't learn how to count till I was 14. I had no chance to go to high school. Anyway, I learned that 2 plus 2 is 4. Now, many decades later, I still can say 2 plus 2 is 4. Everything changed. I have changed. But 2 plus 4 is the same. So how can I measure time as changing when numbers don't change? It's like saying number 1 is a point. Well, number 1 has no extension, and points have no extension. I can add billion, trillion, and so on number ones, and you will never get temporal continuity, nor will I get spatial extension. So to speak, pile up as many points as you like, you will never get extension or continuity. So numbers used to account for our awareness of time, of future, and its length somehow are problematic, philosophically speaking. I mean, it's convenience, okay? I grant all the claim that we can measure time, future and past, as a convenience. But philosophically, it does not account for that future and past. Numbers are timeless. And yet time is, in fact, we grant that time is at the base of all change. So by the time I calculated 4 billion light years, they have changed. And my calculation is no longer relevant. In short, dealing with mathematics as counting time, by the time we finish counting, time has slipped away. So our time awareness cannot be mathematical. In short, we know that we have clock time. We invented clocks to measure time and tell time. Well, is it measuring time or is it convenience for our daily affairs? Well, we have to get up at 6 in the morning. Well, the clock makes noises and we get up. Does that measure time, or is it a way to make sure we wake up in the morning? Sure. Measuring of time is philosophically problematic. Now, next thing about that is that when we deal with our modern projections, let's grant that there are these projections, future. Now, what we project does not exist. Okay, future does not exist. So what we project is now known as possibilities. We project various possible, in fact, people talk about various possible worlds. Okay, we project worlds. We are the place where worlds are projected. It's fantastic power. Now, the projectionism says what we have as a future possibility is non-existent, empty. So, and then what we say is very peculiar. Well, what we projected as possibilities are causing me to do things right now. Well, empty possibility, future, which is not yet, cannot be a cause. It doesn't exist. It is not yet. Okay? So, and what we do is, again, calculate and presume that our calculations of future possibilities are reality. But in principle, they are not present now. So what we have invented in terms of these projections is multiple possibility upon possibility reflections. All economy, all calculations in politics and society in contemporary world is possibilities within possibilities within possibilities. When we say we're going to do something within 5-year span, that's possible. But then we say to do that, within 2 years, we have to accomplish certain things to reach the 5-year plan. That means we have 2 years possibility reflected from 5 years possibility. And then to achieve the 2 years, we have to do something within 1 year. So now we have 5 years reflecting 2 years, 2 years reflecting 1 year. Time possibilities reflecting time possibilities. Here we are opening an empty horizon, possibilities reflecting possibilities within possibilities. Now, possibilities can be attended to. I can look at a possibility that, my next 10 books will be published within 10 years. But to do that, I'll have to write first 3 books.